Dear participants, I hereby welcome you to our event, Mainstreaming UN CRPD Provisions on the Financing of Services for Disabled People into EU legislation on state aid. We're doing this event because we have become aware that national, regional, and local authorities invest large amounts of money into services for disabled people, which are segregating and not inclusive. And it is always talked about that the UN CRPD needs to be mainstreamed into all areas of EU legislation. So we want to open a new chapter. We want to establish a new topic, which is state aid. Here I give you an overview of the agenda. First, I will, the foundation, so to say, of our event is a briefing, a research briefing Edil has produced, which documented several cases of where subsidies are being provided to settings which are segregating, specifically sheltered employment. So I will present the key findings. And also, we have a proposal for legislative reform of an piece of EU legislation, and this is what I will present. And then we will have reactions to the EU proposal from different stakeholders. Katrin Langensieben, member of the European Parliament, Konstantini Levanti, head of policy of ESPD, Hayden Hammersley, officer for social policy at the European Disability Forum, and Immaculada Platencio Porrero of the European Commission. And then we'll have time for questions and discussion. So, first of all, I present our key findings and our proposal for legislative reform. My presentation, EU state aid legislation and the labor market integration of disabled people. What is state aid? It is a bit an obscure topic, but it is very important. It belongs to the key competences of the EU. It is governed by Articles 107 to 109 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. What does state aid mean? What's the definition? In the treaty, it is defined as financial aid granted from state resources favoring undertakings. It can take form, for example, of grants, loans, capital injections, but also taxation. It is really a broad term. An undertaking is defined as any entity offering goods and services. It doesn't matter if it's private or non-profit. Private or public or non-profit, profit doesn't matter. The European Commission, in this area, the European Commission has strong enforcement powers. Also strong legislative and enforcement powers. For example, it can review and decide that an authority has to alter or abolish it. And it can adopt regulations which are then binding on all member states. I brought two examples of state aid cases where the Commission did an investigation. One is the September 2021 ruling against Sweden and Denmark. Both governments had provided a capital injection to Post Nord AB to help with an extensive restructuration program to cope with the decline of physical mailing. 66 million were provided to Post Nord AB. The Commission ruled that this was a breach of regulations, and both governments had to recover this amount of money plus interests. Example 2, in November 2017, the Commission ruled in favor of social welfare organizations in northern Germany who had been receiving 20 million euros per year from the budget of the regional government of Lower Saxony. And the Commission decided that this form of state, this case of state aid, this form of state aid was in line with regulations and allowed it to be maintained. Then what is, so to say, the state of the art of state aid legislation that concerns services for disabled people? There are a number of regulations. There are 3 regulations which are particularly important. So first I should say that the objective of state aid legislation has always been to avoid distortions of competition in the single market. So that, for example, France would not provide huge amounts of money to Peugeot, or the Germans not funnel billions of euros into Volkswagen, so that no one could take over the single market. But over time, the EU became aware that it's not good to apply these rules to social services. And a set of regulations was adopted to exempt social services from these very strict rules on state aid. In 2011, the Services of General Economic Interest, SGEI decision was adopted, which said that services of general economic interest are services meeting social needs as regards health and long-term care, childcare, access to and reintegration into the labor market, social housing, and care and inclusion of vulnerable groups. And it was decided that for these types of undertakings, special rules are needed and more leeway when it comes to receiving financial contributions. Then in 2012, we had the minibus SCGEI regulation, which said that SCGEIs can receive up to 500,000 euros of state aid over 3 fiscal years. And in 2014, we had the general block exemption regulation, which says that aid for the labor market integration of disadvantaged workers with disabilities is also exempt from these very strict state aid rules. And this regulation is the main topic of this presentation and of our proposals for reform, because it must be reviewed until end of 2026 and is thus open for debate. Why is state aid relevant in the context of disability? Well, our research discovered that investments, that spending on certain services for disabled people is not in line with the UN CRPD. We found 4 cases in which 27.6 million euros were spent in institutions, and we found 10 cases in which 533.3.5 million euros were spent on sheltered employment. Why is this not in line with the UN CRPD? We have Article 9 of the UN CRPD, General Comment number 5, and the guidelines on the institutionalization, including in emergencies, which say that state parties must not invest in institutions, not invest into their maintenance or renovation. Then we have Article 27 of the UN CRPD, General Comment number 8, which oblige state parties to include disabled people in the regular labor market. And General Comment number 8, which came out in 2022, says that sheltered employment is a form of discrimination based on ableism and not an effective means of including disabled people in the labor market. Then why is the general block exemption regulation interesting in this context? Because it permits state parties to finance the inclusion of disabled people in the labor market. It thus exempt certain types of financing from the strict rules of state aid. For example, this is the list for what is permitted: wage contributions, adapting premises to the needs of disabled workers, assistance at work, acquiring equipment, transportation, rehabilitation, and also sheltered employment. We have sheltered employment, so it's not aligned with the UN CRPD. And second, there's more evidence that it is not effective in providing a transition into the regular labor market. And according to what authorities say, that is the purpose of sheltered employment. It's not the purpose to keep disabled people there indefinitely. It is the stated objective is to provide transitions into regular work, but there is more evidence that this is not working. In 2021, a large end study of researchers from the University of Amsterdam came out, which found that sheltered employment does not increase the employment rate of disabled men and reduces the rate of women. Then we have individual accounts, for example, of a young man of Germany, who is well qualified, is disabled, and companies refusing to hire him, and social services, the labor agency, the German Employment Agency, instead of from this menu of options, choosing assistance of work at work, is picking sheltered employment. Why? Nobody knows, but the agency is of the opinion that this is the proper way of employment for disabled people, which is not acceptable. Also, I would like to point out the employment rate of disabled people. It's currently, since 2000, it's currently between, various sources say it's between 50.8 and 51.3%. And it has been since 2010, so we're not making progress. The rate for non-disabled people is at 75%, and it has increased over the years. So something is not working out. And the fact that at the moment of truth, authorities, companies opt for sheltered employment instead of other options might be part of the explanation. So our proposal for reform is quite simple. We are proposing that from this list of options, sheltered employment is removed. So there is greater incentive, more pressure, yes, to choose from the other options. And here we already have prepared an amendment in the General Bulk Exemption Regulation. There is this article 34(2)(f), which allows to provide state aid to sheltered employment. And we propose to simply remove this article. So this is not this is restricted, this option. Yes, this is our proposal. For further information, our full briefing is available under this link, and there's also an article on social opposites today, which explains the whole approach in more detail. We invite you to read it. Thank you very much for your presentation. There will be opportunity for questions and discussion later. Right now, I hand over to stakeholders. First of all, in the agenda, first is Katrin Langensiepen, member of the European Parliament, who herself has come into contact with sheltered employment. Katrin, I hand over to you.
Budget line, and here I see a window of opportunity. How is the problem? When we are talking about funding, the problem is we can say it's forbidden. We can say stop funding institutions. We can say it in Brussels, send money to our member states. And in Germany, the member states, or Germany, the country, is free to do with the money what they want. That is the problem. And it's not only directly going into institutions, it could be the farm, eco-one, very social, very bio-ecological, and then they hire persons from sheltered workshops. And here is the lack of a strategy and lack of who's in charge and how can we really change that. That the member states, I don't know how it is in other member states, still have the freedom to do with the money more or less what they want. And then they put the EFRE funds, for example, is a relevant thing, into projects. And if there is an opportunity to change the system, I'm willing to cooperate, as we say. It's not a problem of convincing, it is a problem of how can we make it and transfer it into reality. That is, have an eye on the time, a bit what I found out, what I was busy with, and for the conclusion later, unfortunately, I have to leave in 15 minutes around to talk about a bit about a strategy. How can we push and move forward? I see people, correct me if I'm wrong, from the Commission side. And here, how can we transfer the voice of EDF, the voice of Inclusion Europe, of ENIL, and the other NGOs to make it strong, because who knows what happened to our EU money. So that would be my 2 cents on it. What is the strategy? What is the plan? We can use the upcoming review in March for the EU in Geneva. We could use a moment of time, 5th of May, but of course, we must be prepared. Money is a power, power is money, whatever, that we are on the right moment, right time, and prepared, close to NGOs, together with NGOs and the Parliament, to achieve a shift, a real one. Thank you. Ima, yeah, I see Ima here.
Katrin, thank you for your contribution. Next on the agenda or of speaking is Konstantina Levanti, Head of Policy at ESPD.
Hello, everyone. Okay, my connection works now. I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I had some issues with my computer. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you and share this and engage with you like in this discussion. And thank you very much also to Mr. Langenzieper for her contribution. We are really looking forward to see what will be the next EU budget and how it can actually help to bring innovation on the ground and the change that we absolutely need. When it comes to state aid, just like a little bit of disclosure from my side, I'm not an expert. I have just started working on this topic, and of course, if like there are some quite technical questions, I will have to go back to ESPD and then get back to you with an answer. But I'm happy to make a contribution from our side. So EASPD, for those that maybe are not so familiar with, is a network of support providers for persons with disabilities, and we gather approximately 22,000 support services for persons with disabilities across Europe and beyond. When it comes to state aid, we recently also did a research, and indeed we identified that we know that it plays a key role in increasing employment of persons with disabilities. However, from our research, we found out that public authorities often do not make use of all the possibilities that that state aid can provide. From the research that we did, we identified that indeed rules are complex, they are not well known by public authorities, and sometimes there is also this fear from public authorities to engage with the European Commission in a discussion in order to identify on whether the aid that they want to grant constitutes as state aid or not. These are like some of the findings that you can also access it through our website when it comes to the use of state aid. When it comes to the position of ENIL, I think that at a greater extent we agree with your view of state aid rules, but at the same time we also believe that there are some important nuances that we would like to bring on the table regarding your position. And for us, the first thing is that we want and we believe that we need to take a closer look on how state aid and a better use of state aid can implement the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We are a bit fearful or a bit concerned in a way, if I can put it in this way, on how we can ensure that your proposal of, especially when it comes to Article 34 2F, can lead to improvement. Because of course, when we talk about open labor market employment, state aid can play a role, but there are other issues as well that we need to address and we need to take into consideration. And at the same time, we also wanted to invite you also to take a bit of a state aid, to look at state aid via a broader context. As here, for example, I think that it's important, first of all, to understand what is causing the not use or misuse of state aid. And at the same time, there is quite a broader issue which has to do with the lack of understanding of the UN CRPD. So there are a lot of things that need to happen there. Of course, absolutely, the UN CRPD should need to remain at the core. This is something that we absolutely agree with. However, if we consider, your proposal of completely removing this paragraph, we are just concerned on, what will happen on the people that are already working on protected employment models. At the same time, from the research that we have done, and from the different views and discussions with our members, we see that classifying organizations as shelter workshops is quite broad and nuanced, and there are differences, and if we can say also some promising practices across member states, and it can actually jeopardize some existing promising models. And at the same time, we talk about shelter employment, but does all shelter employment is all shelter employment considered as segregated and contrary to the convention? For example, we hear from our members in Spain, and specifically in the case of special employment centers, that they are in line with the provisions of the convention, and as of course recognized through the general comment 8 of Article 27. So I would like maybe to conclude with like some recommendations, if I can put it like that, that, you know, like for us is imperative to find ways on how, you know, like we can use state aid to improve open labor market employment for persons with disabilities. We absolutely agree there with you. And there are quite some like practical measures that, that we need to consider. For example, EASPD proposed to the European Commission to include an initiative on the second phase of the strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities, which will have a form probably of a guidance or any other initiative that can actually support on how support the understanding of how we can use both public procurement and state aid to support open labor market employment for persons with disabilities. Then I think that it's important to also identify and raise awareness on how these can also be used to further increase the transition rates from more protected employment environments towards open labor market employment. And that also includes that state aid can also be used by mainstream employers. So we don't know if this is the case to a great extent. We would like to propose to Enil, and we are very happy to engage in dialogue with you to explore a bit of a more nuanced legislative terminology. For example, maybe, of course, it's not like a very concrete example, but we were just like wondering on whether, you know, like instead of completely removing this like paragraph, on whether this could be in a way further elaborated by also including some a clear reference to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And last but not least, state aid can play a very important role, but it is just one instrument that can further support open labor market employment and labor market outcomes for persons with disabilities. There are other elements that also need to be addressed, which can have also with political reasons, societal reasons, and other reasons. So these are like my 2 cents for today. And as I mentioned, I'm not an expert, so I just came with a bit of some like points that we are open to further discuss with you. And thank you again for inviting us here. And we will also start and continue to work on this topic and the future revision of state aid rules. Thank you.
Thank you, Konstantina. This was a very helpful intervention. We are certainly willing to dialogue to speak to you about this. Next on the agenda is Hayden Hammersley, Officer for Social Policy at the European Disability Forum. Hayden, please go ahead.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you for having me with you today, and thank you everyone for coming. As we mentioned, it's a very busy week full of lots of activities around disability. I've been taking notes and changing a little bit what I was planning to say, because Florian gave a very nice introduction to the importance of the use of state aid, and Konstantina also mentioned many relevant things that I was going to mention. But just to say that we at the European Disability Forum, of course, work a lot on state aid. It's really one of the things that makes possible a lot of the initiatives around improving possibilities for employment in the open labor market possible. So often when we're advocating for different policies and different initiatives, it's the possibility to use state aid for that actually makes it a reality. And indeed, we really focus mostly on access to employment and the general block exemption regulation that Florian very nicely and concisely introduced at the start. Perhaps maybe something I can say to build on what was mentioned before is that we also advocate a lot for the use of state aid, not only for reasonable accommodation in the workplace and the purchasing of any assistive technology or any changes that, any reasonable accommodation that might come with a cost, which is often a minority of cases, but when it does, we know that the state aid is there for that. But also for it to be used towards training and upskilling workers, which we know is also a possibility. So that's something that we really focus on a lot, and it definitely meets one of the concerns that both persons with disabilities looking for employment are concerned by, but also it's a concern that's raised by many employers who might be hiring persons with disabilities. Of course, there's also the element of wage subsidies that Florian mentioned. And one of the things that we really want to see more flexibility, or in fact more use of, is state aid for those workers who might require personal assistance in the workplace, or costs that are more consistent, or ongoing costs, rather than a single purchase for assistive technology or for changing or rendering an office space more accessible, but like a continuous spending on a personal assistant, or perhaps sign language interpreters and so on. So that's something that we want to see used a lot more, because it's something that can be a lot more costly, and where we see, of course, more hesitancy for it to be used. It's with the general block exemption regulation, one of the things that of course always needs to be updated is the amount that's permitted for member states to use, especially given that the costs from 2014 are no longer the costs we see now when it comes to salaries, or when it comes to the cost of anything. So we've seen quite a significant increase in the cost of many things, and this of course always needs to be adapted accordingly. And on top of this, it needs to be adapted in line with the demand that comes from employers for financial support from the state. I would also echo very much what Konstantina says in terms of the uptake of state aid. So we've also, from our side at EDF, done some research mostly on reasonable accommodation and the use of state aid for reasonable accommodation in employment. And we did a very conscientious and very extensive survey of employers from all of the EU member states. And it was really not necessarily surprising, but quite disheartening how many of the employers didn't know that they could use the state aid to help them cover any costs that come from implementing reasonable accommodation. So it was around 47% of employers just simply didn't know it was a possibility. And even more employers, even those who do know about it, simply don't make use of it because the process is quite burdensome. And there's also an issue of how long they often have to wait in order to get subsidized, and in some cases just what percentage of the cost the subsidies actually cover. So these are all things we would really like to see addressed in order for state aid to actually make a bigger difference. It's not just in terms of what the regulation says or what is permitted, but actually how confident employers on the ground are in using it. And then just to conclude, it's indeed a very it's a sensitive topic among some. At EDF, I mean, our position is always that we want this to go towards fostering employment in the open labor market. It's very much what we advocate for, and it's very much our ethos and what we believe in, and in line with the UN CRPD. But I hear also what Konstantina is saying. I know that even from some disability organizations in Romania, for example, where there was a process of a very quick closure, it wasn't so much the closing that was the problem, but it was done in a little bit of a clumsy way, and there wasn't a preparation done pre-closure of the sheltered workshop. So yes, I would stress that we're very much in favor of it being for the open labor market, but that it be done carefully. So yes, that that will be my closing remark, and I'll hand back to you, Florian. Thank you very much.
You are muted, Florian.
Sorry. So, yes, Hayden, thank you for your contribution. Before we go into questions and discussion, we have one more speaker, Immaculada Placencia Porrero from the European Commission. Iva, please.
Hello, hello, colleagues. Thank you very much for the invitation to this event related with state aid. As you know, let me start with a disclaimer because state aid is not the area in which I work. It's not a directive that is under the responsibility of employment. Nevertheless, we have been working closely with our colleagues on the DigiComp in order to enhance the possibilities under the state aid to support the rights of persons with disabilities. And in fact, there are many possibilities. Today we are dealing with the employment-related matters, but there were other areas also in which state aid can provide support, like, for example, in the area of the access to culture, just to give one example. Now, the state aid, I mean, a lot has been said already, so I will try to focus on some key points. I have been discussing this with my colleagues responsible for the regulation and the secondary legislation about it. And they insisted to tell me that the state aid is made in such a way that it would allow member states to cater for social needs in the most appropriate way. Hence, there is a lot of flexibility in the way in which the member states can use financial support in this area. And what the state aid is meant to be a tool for achieving certain policy objectives. But the state aid control is to ensure that public support to enterprises is necessary and proportionate to the objectives pursued. So the primary intention is to avoid undue distortion of competition and trade contrary to the common interest. So state aid rules offer member states options for supporting certain investments and activities with state aid, so with subsidies, and achieve certain outcomes. But please note that the outcomes that are achieved or not, they are not the objective of the state aid regulation. So, for example, whether member states would provide state aid for shelter employment or not is not something that it is, and the objective of the state aid is not to improve employment, but to allow that when member states decide to use these funds to support employment of persons with disabilities, then they do it in a way that is compatible with internal market. And indeed, it is true that the conditions under which the state aid for sheltered employment can be granted are pretty straightforward and just, as I said, safeguards to preserve competition. And the objective to support labor market inclusion of persons with disabilities depends also on many other conditions. And I think it's important that when the state aid is discussed also for in terms of sheltered employment, emphasis is made or it's made very visible that state aid could be used for persons in sheltered environments to support their transition to the open labor market. So one needs to be very careful that, of course, the Commission in the employment policies has as a priority also to support employment in the open labor market and to achieve more employment of persons with disabilities in the open labor market, but that the transition needs, it's important to be addressed. So, for example, issues related to lack of skills, social infrastructures, could be supported also to support persons in sheltered employment to go towards the open labor market. This is something to consider. The other point I would like to mention is that the public support, well, two things, that support for sheltered employment or for employment in general for persons with disabilities, it concerns the private sector but also the public sector, because the regulation is based on the concept of these entities and could include also public employment, and that the support for labor markets inclusion does not necessarily, or sheltered employment does not necessarily fall under state aid rules. For example, this is the case if the support is granted on market terms or is only very small, de minimis aid, or has a pure local impact and does not affect intra-community trade. So this is also important to realize that not all the member state support, the financial support to employment of persons with disabilities comes from fundings that fall or subsidies that fall under the state aid. In principle, the Article 107 of the treaty declare any state aid in any form to be incompatible with the internal market. That has to be clear. So in principle, it is forbidden, but indeed, under certain conditions, and it's considered state aid, and in the certain conditions is allowed. And as I said, it is very much linked to the concept of undertaking. And an undertaking is any entity engaged in an economic activity. And an economic activity is defined as consisting offering goods or services in the market, and it could be also a public support even for non-profit organizations that employ disadvantaged or workers with disabilities, could be subject to state aid rules. Now, as has been said, the state aid is exempted from the general provision and is declared compatible. And I would like to call the attention that of the very many possibilities beyond just supporting the sheltered employment. In terms of adaptations of workplaces. By the way, several years ago, we did a study on the financing of reasonable accommodation, and it came out that each member state at the time had funds to support, financially support reasonable accommodation. And it's true that it was not sufficiently used or even well known by employers, but the important thing is that those funds are available, and that the General Block Exemption Regulations provides a definition of employer with disabilities that goes beyond the sheltered employment, and allows for, as it has said, wage subsidies and, for example, and many other elements like adapting the premises, providing personal assistance, assistive technology, transportation workers from home to the workplace and back, even some rehabilitation. And that is why I highlight this, because the issue of habilitation, rehabilitation, and support to go to work into the transition towards the open labor market is something to consider. And currently, in the paper that has been provided, well, there is also a reference to the issues related to social services of general interest that can also be getting some support and be exempted of sometimes notification. And here issues related, for example, to social housing and social care or social inclusion could be considered, accompanying that transition towards the open labor market. What I can tell is that the rules on state aid were subject of a major reform in 2023, with the overall objective of being updated to the new market and technology developments, and to allow effective support for the transition on the green and digital transition, which is also very important in terms of accessibility. And there is now a need for stability to allow member states to advance on the implementation and use to consolidate these revised rules. Of course, I cannot comment on possible revision of the rules, because there is nothing being decided or nothing being set in place that is publicly available. And but I would like to say that when the Commission carries out such reforms of legislation, or is always, of course, aiming to do it in a way that is evidence-based. So there will be an opportunity, should that be the case, to provide your views and for this process. I would like also to call your attention to a study that seems to be commissioned in relation to supported employment, social enterprises. So there, in the context of the Action Plan for Social Economy, there is a study on state aid and access to finance, and that would be something I think relevant for you to see what information is gathered in that context. So this is a little bit what I can say. I mean, the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities only refers to state aid as a possible source of financing actions to implement the CRPD, to implement the strategy itself, but does not enter into these discussions. But I'm sure that there will be opportunities, should this become actual, to establish a dialogue between the Commission and stakeholders, those that have an direct interest in the matter. I thank you for your attention.
Yes, Ima, thank you very much for explaining us also how things work. Now I open the floor for questions, discussions, remarks. Who has a question to the speakers? Yeah. Please raise your hand and I will then give you the floor. Yes, Stephen, I was wondering whether you have a question, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Florian. Thank you so much for organising this really excellent discussion at a very important time when we're looking at the review of the directive upcoming. I just had a couple of reflections and points really in reply to some of the very interesting presentations we've had, because I think one of the things I heard was whether by definition sheltered workshops are segregated employment settings. And I can understand why that question emerges. But it seems to me that the answer of this is pretty clear in paragraphs 14 and 15 of the general comments. It is absolutely the case that by definition, sheltered workshops are segregated employment environments and therefore violate the convention. And so I think it's extremely important that we proceed on that basis. I don't think that takes away from the very important point that we must acknowledge, that clearly there have been sheltered employment schemes that have received state aid across Europe for some period of time. There are people that are affected in those programs, and it is absolutely incumbent on the planning to amend the state aid rules, the transition, the real transition is supported. I don't think that means the continuing operation of sheltered employment settings. And I think this is where the paragraph F that you've pointed out, Florian, is very important. That paragraph F enables ongoing financing of specifically sheltered workshop environments. Whereas the other things we were talking about, the ability for people to access transport or personal assistance or other forms of support, can adequately be covered, it seems to me, under A, B, C, D, and E, without the need for F. So I don't want to overstress the point, but it's also very, very critical that we all understand in the movement and also in these discussions that sheltered employment also cannot be regarded as a form of progressive realization. It is not a form of progressive realization. We have to accept, I think, that the current schemes do need to be closed, and of course, with adequate planning for an effective transition on that basis. The only other point I wanted to make is that I think, just to draw everyone's attention to paragraph 82 of the general comment, which of course very specifically points out under subpara I that we must expeditiously phase out segregated employment, including sheltered workshops. And the committee goes on, not that this is just closed, and I very much heard Hayden's point here that this was done poorly in Romania. I've seen the same happen in parts of the United Kingdom when we were still in the EU. So, but that should not be an excuse. The committee goes on that there must be concrete action plans, resourcing, timeframes, and monitoring mechanisms. And this is precisely the sort of effective change that could really end sheltered employment, but also enhance access to the open labour market. So Validity very much supports your proposals here, Enil, and thank you very much for this very important discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. These were all excellent points. And it is certainly the case. I just, for a while, I had shared this slide there again about all the things which are possible to be financed. And then making sure, like what Hayden said and Konstantina, that companies, employers can use them. This is also a little bit something distinct from this regulation. The regulation does not go into detail too much about then procedures by which employers can apply to this for this. So it's a bit of a separate matter. Caesar, you had raised your hand. No. Nadia, please.
Florian, I just have a question for Ali, a reflection for all the speakers and everybody present here, because the target of this webinar was trying to find out how we could, on European level, create something or have something that that could stimulate, or because they could not impose member states to be CRPD compliant with the state aid, but as the guidelines are there for independent living, isn't there any possibility to connect? And I know that EDF was asking also to have, like for the youth, an employment and skills guarantee, you know, facilitating inclusion in the regular employment market for persons with disabilities. You know, if we could not ask something that takes everything at the same time into account, so that we should not repeat ourselves on different topics. Let's ask for something concrete, including state aid and employment.
Would someone like to react to this? Yes, Konstantin.
I can just like offer some like proposals in a way, and just like also to say thank you to Stephen Allen for like also really pinpointing some different parts of the general comment 8, and some just like maybe to highlight 2 things: that adequate planning of transitions is needed in order to ensure that people do not lose the support, and also to remain employed. And something interesting as well is that I was recently discussing with a colleague, and they were even mentioning that even in like countries with very like progressive models and transitions in place, like Sweden, if you look on the transition rate, it's only 3 to 5% per year, and this is quite, I think, disturbing and challenging to actually see that even in like more progressive countries, still it's quite difficult to further support transitions toward open labor market, and we absolutely think that state aid and public procurement can play a critical role to further improve that, and also improve open labor market outcomes for persons with disabilities. And at the same time, a part of that, of course, we are talking about strengthening policies, and something else which we also like recently discussed in Athens. So we recently did a conference in Athens, which the focus was on open labor market employment, and that came also mainly because our members actually want to further advocate towards their government to implement a supported employment law, supported employment policies, and they will soon start some sort of pilot project from our understanding, which of course is like quite, I think, great to hear. So we actually needed to ensure that the policies, other existing policies or new policies, need to be strengthened to further like supporting this enabling framework that are needed. And we are also happy to see that there is also a focus from, as we saw on the mission letter of Ms. Minzatu, on modernizing as well VET vocational and training systems by forming a European strategy, and at the same time focuses on a quality jobs roadmap, because indeed these if developed correctly, and if they are also backed up by EU funding that can further support innovation on the ground, can further support on the transitions that are needed, and to ensure that the open labor market opportunities exist and people are supported to ensure that they do not just enter the open labor market, but then also retain employment in the open labor market. So for this, we also need to train and also build the capacity of also like employers, but also of different support services and public employment services, and cooperate with them. And as it's when we are talking about like employment, I think that we need also to look it from a more like holistic approach as everything. So this is just like something that I would like to bring on.
Yeah, it's been highlighted a couple of times that transitions are important. I mean, removing just sheltered employment from the list in the GBR, it would of course not have the effect of like banning or ending all funding for sheltered workshops. Some forms would still be going on. What we found cases where sheltered workshops are renovated or newly built, sometimes also to maintain them. It would just have the effect of making it more difficult for member states to finance this. But of course, it would not block it altogether. I'm sure there would still be other legal avenues. So there is no risk, I would see, of an abrupt ending. It would, I think, mainly have the effect of increasing the incentive or also the pressure a bit to work with the other options which are available here. So yeah, I think the risk of any dramatic effects, it's not so big, not so large, but yeah, it would have the effect of that people would have to ask themselves a bit more, what else can we do, you know, to achieve this. Ines.
Thanks, Florian. I know Cesar also had a comment, but Cesar, do you want to go first?
No. He said he doesn't want. No,
okay.
I asked him. He said he doesn't want.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to comment on Konstantina's last point. I think it's really a bit of a catch-22 situation, because I mean, I'm not surprised that not many people are transitioning into open labor market, because as long as so much funding is going into sheltered employment, of course, there is really no incentive to help people get into the open labor market. And of course, it takes much more effort and planning and thinking to do that than simply, place people into these sheltered employment structures. So as with institutions, we always need some kind of real financial incentive or disincentive to trigger reform. So I think, I completely agree with Florian's last point. I mean, we can also see structural funds going into sheltered workshops. By the way, it's not just state aid, but this would cut one source of funding, and there should be, of course, in parallel, real efforts to help other employers use state aid. I don't know who mentioned here, which of the speakers now, that they don't really use it or know how to use it. So this should all go in parallel. But as long as these, as Katrin mentioned, these are just old structures who have been running these places for, I don't know, decades, and it's what they do as long as they exist. And I mean, there's really no incentive to transition people into the open labor market. And even the more progressive countries, of course, have problems with inadequate support for people, and we are seeing cuts in support. So I mean, this would be really just one way to stimulate and support employers in the open labor market to also to benefit and to use it. But I think we would also, if we wanted to really push this, we would have to agree also amongst ourselves. There would have to be enough pressure to change this regulation, which is why I think we are organizing this webinar as well to discuss. But yeah, that's my contribution, Claudia.
Thanks, Ines. Yeah, it's good. Konstantina also mentioned that we could dialogue, cooperate on this. Maybe also there are when we look at this list of options, maybe also we can find other possibilities, other instruments that could be used, which could be added to the list, to have some which are UN CRPD compliant. I mean, there was the question how to define sheltered workshops. General comment number 8 established a list of criteria definitions, and this can then be used also to identify. And that's really the general comment. It's a great source. It also mentions a couple of forms of employment. Employment forms to help integration into the regular labor market, which are compliant. So having a closer look at this, we would probably be able also to identify some good alternatives to sheltered employment. So we could be more relaxed about taking this out and maybe putting something else in. Yeah. Nadja, please go ahead.
What I miss in the discussion also, because many times you say people are the member states, are the employers are not aware, and so on. In campaign, there's no campaign in sensibilization about what is existing and what are the possibilities, and that persons with disabilities can be effective employers like others if you give them the means and the support that it's needed. And then you will stimulate also better education for them, because then they will be more motivated because they know there is an employment market waiting for them. So I was wondering, Ima, is it maybe a role that the disability unit can take over, doing a campaign about inclusive employment, and then highlighting very well in which direction investment should go under her role of the implementation of the CRPD? No, just promoting.
Well, I think those opportunities are part of the employment package. So part of the raising awareness about a comprehensive set of measures is what is intended with the employment package. So opportunities on how to best use the state aid opportunities for the transition, but also for supporting employment in the open labor market, because there is the majority of the elements that are on the state aid are relevant for employment, support the employment of persons with disabilities in the open labor market. So yeah, this is something to address in the context of the employment package. I don't think it's excluded.
Okay.
If there are other questions or remark, I keep it an eye on the participant list. Everybody, please just raise your hand. It doesn't have to be only the speakers discussing here. it was mentioned time and again that the conditions for employers to access financial support when it comes to employing disabled people, like to adapt premises, that this is very complicated often. And so what I was wondering, maybe also the question to Ima a bit, what can the EU level do to motivate member states to cut red tape, to make it easier to access this support? Isn't also this something we could explore? You know, for example, to get a grant, to get a subsidy, to pay for assistance at work, for example, or to purchase equipment. How isn't this something, or that's something we could do? Yeah, we can first also gather questions and remarks. Cesar?
I just see the statistics, and I always see disabled people at the bottom of the labor market. And don't you think, or doesn't anyone think that what aids are available from Europe are useful for anything? Thank you. If anyone has the answer, please go ahead.
Hey, Ima, you're next, please.
Yes. Well, to say, I mean, I would like to insist that the regulation is not the place, I mean, it's not about how to, or in which, for which social outcomes the subsidies should be put in place, or what are the procedures to get access to that state aid, to those subsidies. That is something for the member state. In that context, I think that it is the member states that you really need to target to simplify procedures for having access to those possibilities. Also, that they create when they create the possibility to offer subsidies, that they do it for the right purposes and focusing on the outcomes, not only the procedures. What I was thinking of is that well, currently we have just sent a mail to all the NGOs to propose subjects to be discussed in the context of the disability platform. So maybe I don't know, you could propose to discuss the rules on state aid and I would not limit it to employment, but really although it's the point of today's event, but rather go into a wider approach to address also state aid for independent living, state aid for participation in society, state aid, so all the different possibilities, so that member states, on one hand, they are fully aware of the possibilities, but also that when they offer those possibilities, that they do it with the convention in mind, and being fully respectful for the rights of persons with disabilities. So I would say, I mean, it's up to you to put this on the agenda of the member states for coming meetings of the platform.
Yeah, that is a very good idea. And today, in fact, we have been discussing what we're going to propose. Yeah, we will. I think it is quite likely that we will take this up. And for us, of course, the idea is not just to discuss state aid in connection to employment. We are doing this now because the GEBE is up for review. But the idea is also to address state aid in the context of institutions and deinstitutionalization, and then also the funding of personal assistance or centers for independent living, for example. So go on and continue this discussion. What are legitimate and illegitimate aims of state aid? And I think it would be good to talk with member state authorities, with governments in the disability platform to see a bit, gather practices.
Yeah, may I respond to that, clarify one thing, Florian? It is that I have no formal indications of any reform at this moment, but I would not link this type of dialogue to a possible reform, but rather what are the options within the current rules, because the current rules have immense opportunities to support independent living, employment in the open labor market, inclusive education, many things, but really to highlight those opportunities within the current regulation as a starting point. And then, okay, should there be a reform, of course, you can address these other things, but I would not wait to focus only on a possible reform.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for explaining. Hayden, please.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I was just listening to what Cesar had said about disabled people being too often at the bottom of the labor market. I remember one thing we saw that was quite interesting once on a study visit to Cyprus. It was before COVID, so I don't know if this is still the emphasis they have, but in Cyprus, they had less of an emphasis on using state aid for reasonable accommodation in the workplace, but they did have quite a developed system of grants for entrepreneurship and for starting businesses led by persons with disabilities. So it was focused on this group. So it was quite an interesting focus they had, and quite a, this focus on persons with disabilities as being the leaders of their business. It's not for everyone, and of course it takes a particular profile of person to be ready to run their own business and to have the confidence to do so. But it was quite an interesting approach, which in some sense responds to this issue that Cesar had mentioned. And it did also have some advantages in that certain disabled people using the grants were setting up businesses specifically aimed at the disabled community, and kind of had a niche in the market of whichever sector that they wanted to create their business in. It wasn't a perfect system, and also the grants were just kind of to get the businesses going, but just an example of some ways in which state funding in this case were being used.
Yeah, if my memory is not wrong, I think general comment number 8 actually mentions this form as a possibility, legitimate form to support employment of disabled people if a company is really, or non-profit really led by disabled people and owned and run, and every aspect is decided by them themselves. Then this is a legitimate, and also they have normal working conditions, of course, and the work is of value, and then this is also a legitimate form of employment. Yes, the general comment mentioned that. Yeah, I think there are a lot of good examples also. Yeah, totally. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. This was a good discussion. I think in the interest of time, I think since we all have a lot to do, I think we would like to close punctually. I think I give, what did we say, Nadja? Do you want to give some closing remarks, or shall I?
As you are leading, go ahead. All honors to you.
Okay, yes, thank you all for the very good contributions. I hope this is the start of a debate, of a discussion. I also, yeah, the feedback was for us. This was kind of a beta test to see how the community would respond to the idea to make state aid a topic. And I think we were able to see, yes, that the response is positive and that we need to talk about this, that we need to discuss state aid, and we need to figure out how we can use this option better to support of employment people. And I think we will have a long road ahead. A challenge will then also be how to involve DG competition in this debate. We tried to invite the DG competition to this event, but yeah, we got a polite decline. The head of unit didn't seem to quite understand why we wanted to involve him in something related to disability. So there's a challenge ahead. Yeah, again, thank you all for participating. Yeah, it is 5:30. Oh, Emma has a
Well,
comment.
I would like to end up with a positive note on my colleagues in DigiCom, because they have been very helpful in supporting me on this. I think it's important also that to address the right colleagues, because not everybody knows about it, and I'm sure that they will be open to discuss but within the limits of what they can do, because as I said, most of the work within the possibilities are with the member states. But I just wanted to publicly thank them, because they have been really helpful in supporting me for preparing for this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. I did not know that they were involved through you, so I stand corrected. I apologize.
No problem, no problem. But I
for-
just wanted to share it with you. And I understand that this is not their primary area of work. It's one of the many areas. That's why they prefer, I mean, when we asked them for help, they supported us.
That's very good. And with your help, then probably we will be able to involve also them in a discussion and possibly meet with us. Okay. Once again, thank you very much. I hereby close the debate, close the meeting. Have a wonderful afternoon.
You too. Thank you, Florian, for hosting an amazing event and a very informative event.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you,
Yeah.
Florian.